Welcome everyone, my name is Brendan Snyder. Thank you so much for joining me. This is 10 albums ahead of their time. So these are seminal albums that when released were generally overlooked and weren't fully embraced at the time, but have gone on to become influential classics in their own right. And we've got 10 of these to go through. But before we do, if you're new to my channel and you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please click the button. Also leave a comment, hit like, all those things help support my channel. I would greatly appreciate it. And if you enjoyed the video or know someone that would, please share it out on social media as well. I would greatly appreciate that. And of course, by subscribing, you'll be able to stay up to date on all that's going on in the world of music, just like this, with 10 albums ahead of their time. And coming in at number 10, kicking the whole thing off here, we've got the debut studio album from Cheap Trick, came out in 1977. And this one here, it didn't even crack the Billboard 200 at the time. While well received by critics though, it ran under the radar, didn't sell very well. The one and only single that came off of it, Oh Candy, it didn't even chart. However, the band has gone on to become a big influence on the later alternative scene of the late 80s and early 90s, with bands like Nirvana, Smashing Pumpkins, Green Day, all citing Cheap Trick as a major influence and even covering songs off this debut album here. Coming in at number 9, we've got Iggy and the Stooges, Raw Power 1973 release, third studio album by the band, but the album itself favored the more anthemic hard rock approach, different than what they did on the first two albums. While not commercially successful at the time, it did build up a cult following over the decades. The album itself is now considered a forerunner to the punk movement, Iggy Pop himself even being nicknamed the Godfather of Punk. Coming in at number 8, we've got The Velvet Underground and Loaded from 1970, fourth studio album by these guys. Also the final album to feature founding member and main songwriter Lou Reed. The material on this album though was aimed at radio play, being more commercially acceptable to the general public, but it failed to chart and was not considered a commercial success at the time. Retrospectively though, it has gained a lot of recognition and now seen as a seminal proto-punk album, with its 1, 2, 3 song opening sequence on it with Who Loves the Sun, Sweet Jane, Rock and Roll. I mean, how can it not? It's really great. If you don't know it, do check that out. By the early 2000s though, this album routinely began to appear on lists of the greatest rock albums. Despite this though, in 2013, the last time the album was certified, it has only sold 250,000 copies. That is 250,000. All right, coming in at number 7, we've got the debut studio album by the New York Dolls, released in 1973, met with widespread critical acclaim at the time, but sold poorly, commercially a failure. The band was very difficult to market with their exaggerated drag appearance, and the band's crude musicianship and youthful attitude threatened the prevailing musical trends at the time, most especially prog rock, which was just raging at that time. But the album itself did become an influential precursor to the punk movement, now generally considered one of the most acclaimed albums within that genre, constantly being named on best debuts, as well as one of the greatest punk rock records of all time. All right, coming in at number 6, we've got Pink Floyd, Saucer Full of Secrets, 1968, second studio album. This one here is the first one with David Gilmour taking over for Syd Barrett. Generally dismissed at the time, critics cited it as inferior to their debut album Piper at the Gates of Dawn. Their feeling was that without founding member Syd Barrett, of course he does appear on 3 tracks, but without him, they lost their creative catalyst. But what I see is it actually resulted in all of the band members contributing, bringing in a much more set of diverse influences to it. So while the album itself did chart in the UK, it didn't chart in the US. However, later on, in 2019, actually, it charted at number 158 for the first time, all due to Record Store Day. So anyone thinking that vinyl isn't helping these bands, it certainly is. And up until 2019, this was the only album in Pink Floyd's catalog that had not charted. So that was great. The album itself is now seen as one of the best in Pink Floyd's catalog and a generator for what was to come later on within their career on albums such as Dark Side of the Moon and going forward. All right, we're halfway there. So coming in now at number 5, we've got the Ramones debut studio album from 1976. While receiving glowing reviews from Spin and Rolling Stone magazines at the time, it was unsuccessful commercially. Only reached number 111 on the Billboard 200 album chart and only sold 6,000 copies in its first year. Now, later on, it would be certified gold for 500,000 copies, and now is considered to have popularized the punk movement. Later, hugely influential in the punk movement as well as with rock, grunge, alternative, even metal, and is now routinely appearing near or at the top of best punk album lists that are published. Coming in at number 4, we've got Deep Purple Concerto for Group and Orchestra 1969. The album I'm going to show you, though, is actually Gemini Suite 1970, the only live performance from the Concerto album to have taken place. But the Concerto album that I want to talk about is also a live recording that included the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. And so it's one of the first combinations of a rock band with a full orchestra. And at the time, the album only charted in a few countries, did not chart in the US. While it was praised for its integrity, it was something out of left field and they did not know how to market it at the time. However, it did pave the way for rock and orchestra performances to happen, which became really big in the late 90s upon the release of Metallica's S&M, Symphony in Metallica, and that just exploded everything. But if you go all the way back, one of the first ones was here with Deep Purple doing this in 1969. All right, coming in at number 3, we've got David Bowie, Space Oddity 1969, second studio album, and I'm going off of what David considers his second studio album, even though there is that one early one floating around out there. This was his second studio album, originally self-titled, but considered a commercial failure when it came out. It didn't even chart. Critics claimed it had a lack of cohesiveness to it, although it did contain one of David Bowie's biggest or most well-known songs, Space Oddity, the tale about a fictitious astronaut. The album would be re-released later on, though, upon the success of his fifth studio album, Ziggy Stardust, in 1972, tying in with the whole space traveler theme. And so that's why they retitled it Space Oddity. Then it did chart in both the US and the UK. So the album itself mixes folk rock, country, psychedelia, even some progressive rock in there, into what I think becoming a precursor of an album that bridges styles, genres, and isn't limited musically to any one particular area. Okay, coming in at number 2, Metallica Kill 'Em All 1983 debut studio album, panned by the critics outside of the metal world, did not chart at the time, and only sold 17,000 copies in its first year. The album's style and lyrics were generally different than what was going on in mainstream music at the time. Later, though, it would be considered a groundbreaking album for thrash metal because of its precise musicianship and a fusing of hardcore and punk tempos together. Now, it's considered to now be one of the best rock albums, appearing on so many different publications, and it would finally chart in 1986 and has gone on to sell over 3 million copies in the US. Okay, coming in at number 1, we have, the number 1 all-time record ahead of its time, Black Sabbath, 1970 debut studio album. This one here was recorded in one day, only 12 hours, so actually only half a day. Virtually no other overdubs were done on this thing, and it received generally negative reviews upon its release, even being called the worst of counterculture when it came out. But here's the thing, so the album itself is based around the tritone, and with lyrics including evil, the occult, and horror film imagery. It's widely considered to be the first heavy metal album of all time. Additionally, the song Black Sabbath that's on here is also referred to as the first doom metal song. So the album itself is now seen as transcending its roots of blues rock and psychedelia, becoming a watershed moment for heavy rock music at the time, and starting point for what would become an entirely new genre of music, going on to sell well over 1 million copies in the US. And so there you go. That is 10 albums ahead of their time. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Let me know what you think might be an album that was ahead of its time. Let me know what you think of these 10 here. And of course, leave your comments, leave your general thoughts. Let me know what's going on. Take care, have a great day, and I hope I see you all real soon. Bye-bye, guys.